Welcome back to the Real Deal Podcast with Asher Cohen. Today's guest is Norman Blakey, who focuses on estate planning, estate and gift taxation, trust, wills, and probate avoidance. He graduated Arizona State University with a Bachelor of Science in Accounting. Norman then graduated from Arizona Summit Law School and focused his studies on estate planning. Previously, he's advised small businesses in areas of business formation, employment law, contract tax law, and construction law. All right, Norman, good morning. How are you?
Doing well, Asher. How are you?
Doing great. Excited for today's episode. We get asked often, and we like to advise other people in regards to making sure that they're protecting themselves if they own real estate or not, if they have a family or if they don't, if they have assets, really what it comes down to. And we've met through just a bunch of our networks, and it's been great learning about, just how you help people. And you've already helped a few clients of ours. So before we get into the biggest topic of today, which is about trusts and how to protect yourselves and things of that nature, who's Norman?
Norman is someone who pretty much grew up here in Arizona. I'm pretty much the run-of-the-mill guy. My name says it all. I am the norm. I fit right into kind of the basics of everything. But for the most part, you'll see me out taking photos and doing my job and just having my family and going out on hikes, and I'm at the movies. I'm that kind of guy. So, yeah.
Nice. So just a normal Norman.
Yes. Yeah, I am the norm.
Got it. I love it.
I lived in Boston, and I'd walk into the Cheers bar or whatever, and they would yell out my name.
Oh, that's a perfect fit. I love that. So how did you get into trusts and protecting people and so forth?
So the reason why I got in this particular area is actually from my grandmother on my dad's side. When she was growing up, her parents were real estate investors actually in the Orlando area. And so when they passed away, she inherited a lot of property, and she didn't have the greatest advisors around her. So she went from someone that could have $20 million worth of assets to being on Medicaid and living on Social Security. That's all she had when she passed away. So when we went back for a funeral, I got to see the house my dad grew up in that wasn't set up to go to his family. So I got to see what not having good advisors and a good plan looked like. It's directly affected my family. And so I decided this was the area of law that I wanted to focus on.
Nice. And it's interesting, right? I mean, we end up going towards the things that we see either work really well in our life growing up, or finding things that really didn't go as to plan, and then we create the the value and help others learning from the mistakes that our families have made.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting if we all look at how we ended up in the situation that we're in and how we help others, how we got there. So thank you for sharing that. And really, like, what's the basics? Like, people throw terms out a lot, right? Like a trust and a will and this P word like probate. I think a lot of people have a sort of an understanding of it all, but I know a lot of people throw things out and they might mean one thing, but they're saying something else. So let's break some of those things down. Can you help us with that today?
Right. So I'll start off with a will, because that's what most people know about. You get to see it in all the fun TV episodes. There's good movie plot lines around what a will reading looks like and all those things. And so everyone believes that a will is how to transfer assets to their children or to family or other beneficiaries. And it is. But a will in itself is a statutorily designed process to transfer assets. And that statutorily designed process is probate. And you could end up in probate with or without a will. But a will, if you create that and you have assets, you are guaranteeing your family goes through the probate process. And the probate process can be a fearful process. It can be an expensive process. It can be a long process. And the reason it is because even if you put a will in place, you're saying, I wish this happened. And then a judge has to say, okay, does the law allow for your wishes? And then your kids get to say, or whoever your beneficiaries are, go, well, I don't like what mom or dad said. And now I'm going to challenge whether or not that's really what they wanted. Did their actions and words actually align? And so that's kind of the first step of probate is saying we have the will or we don't have a will. And now we need to figure out what is the intent of mom and dad and how does that align with the statutory process. And then probate in itself has its own requirements. And so the quickest probate you possibly have is someone with no assets, really, and a minimum of 6 months. So you're in a court for a minimum of 6 months. And I've never seen a probate only go for 6 months. Most probates end up going for 12 to 18 months. And so in that time frame, everything that your parents owned is tied up with a court having to help determine what happens there. And if anyone contests or argues who's representing mom or dad or what their wishes were, that's what only extends the process. And that's where your inheritance goes away. So people don't realize like a will is really, I'm going to go to court and well, my family's going to go to court and then have to figure out what's happening. And so some families, a lot of my clients that come to me say, I've been through that for my parents. I don't want to go, my kids go through that process at all. So how do we avoid that, Norman? And so the typical way of doing that is a trust. And a trust in itself is something that is designed to avoid probate because it's a contract. Most people don't realize it. They just think of, your super rich individuals, and it's really just a contract between you as an owner of your own property and you as a manager of your own property. So you get to own and manage your own property for the benefit of a third party. So the beneficiaries are the ones who are going to end up taking your property. So a standardly designed trust will say, I, Norman, have all of my assets in here. I create this. When I pass away, X person is going to be in charge of managing all of these things, and my beneficiaries are these individuals. And because you have that outlined, and that entity, that contract doesn't die, I do, but it doesn't, it avoids the whole probate process. And so that is at its core what estate planning is for post-death planning.
So right off the bat, I think there's a lot of people that are probably already like, hold on a second. If I have a will, there's still probate.
Yes.
And you made it very clear, yes, like that's a thing. And I think most people, right, that's one of those misconceptions. Most people think, hold on, I have a will. So I'm avoiding probate. I'm avoiding all of the hassle that my family has to go through when I'm gone or whenever someone, leaves us. Like we have to go through that process still. So really what we want is a trust.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And I know that there's a couple different types of trusts. We're not maybe going to get into all of those, but we'll probably just go into the common type that you'll help us with. But that's a really big takeaway that even if you have a will, you still need a trust to avoid probate.
Yes.
Okay. Why do people not like probate other than the fact that, like you said, it's a long, drawn out process?
Yeah. Well, that one is really situation specific. So right now I have a client, her mom died, but they don't know who the father is. So mom died of a drug overdose. Girl
Mm,
was 14 when that happened. She's now 15. All of mom's assets, there's no will, there's nothing. So how do we get it to a 15-year-old child? That process is different than what it looks like for a 30-year-old child inheriting from their parents. But for that young minor age child, I'm having to go through extra steps. So what makes that process even more difficult is hiring and getting a conservator appointed. So before I can even open the probate, I'm having to find a conservator who is different than whoever's going to court to manage the mom's estate. So first, one party has to go do this, get themselves appointed, so they can then sign the documents on behalf of the 15-year-old. So that process adds a minimum of 3 months. So if you have minor age kids, imagine your family now having to take on the cost of raising your kids for a minimum of 3 months before they have access to any funds. And really, it's actually longer, because they also have to pay for the conservatorship and get all that appointed. And then we can open up the probate. And that could take a month before a court says anyone has authority to get access to these funds. So we could be 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 months down the road before your family has funds to pay for your kids' care. And that
So
stretches budgets.
so the trust is an initial investment that someone or a family will make in order to save time, emotional distress,
Mhm.
but also money. Like it
Yeah.
does save money because you don't need all these other people involved to help, figure out what's lawfully the right move, but also what is the right move for
Mhm.
those assets. So here, let's spin this around. Someone that doesn't have anything to their name, they don't own anything. Their estate is bubkiss.
Mhm.
Should Is there a point of a will, of a trust? Is that
I would still recommend a will at the very minimum. And the
okay?
reason being is because if you have family members you don't want things to go to, if you happen to inherit something, then the will will at least help dictate where your assets should go. And I've had a client had that happen. Their parents had no will in place. There was multiple kids, adopted children, children that had they didn't even remember having because it was like multiple marriages, like when they were in this instance, a family from Puerto Rico. So different sets of kids, and they really all wanted everything to go to the one child I was representing. But there was nothing in writing. And so when
Hmm.
they passed, what had happened was the dad inherited property, but he didn't know it. So when he passed away, he was an heir to something. And so the only way to get it to the child that I'm representing or any of their siblings, um, is to go open a probate, and I have to declare what the wishes were. So even if you don't think you have anything, I still recommend at least a will so you can ensure it goes to the people you want it to go to. But that's the goal. Like essentially is declaring what you want.
So here's going to be a pop quiz for all of our listeners, and there is a prize involved for whoever writes into either Norman or myself. There is a famous restaurant in Phoenix that I was told when I was there last by the staff that when the owner passed, the inheritance, the will, was instructing um, that all of the assets go to the dog of the owner. Okay, so if anyone knows which restaurant, the person's name or restaurant, they do go together. Pop quiz there. There is a prize involved, so just want to throw that in. But Norman, when should someone consider getting a trust and putting one in? Like, is it an age? Is it a number of assets? It's a dollar amount. Like when is it time for someone to say, you know what, this is the time that I need to get serious about this? It's not a sexy thing, right? It's not a sexy conversation to have personally, and I'll get into this a little bit later when Danielle and I were getting things, put together. It's talking about when we die. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. But when should someone consider like, hey, this is the time to get going here?
All right. So the first one is I have kids. That is the first time I would recommend getting a trust. The flip side is in my instance, I'm not married. I have no kids. But I have assets. I have more than $75,000 worth of assets. And when I say assets, I'm meaning my car, I'm meaning my clothes, meaning my laptop, I'm meaning what's in my bank account, my 401k, all of those things. People don't realize that what's sitting just in their apartment or home can push you into what's probate. And probate is really $75,000 or more for assets. Um, and that's really where I would start to draw the line and say, I need to trust is I have kids or I don't, and I need to make sure this is all taken care of. So like my assets are going to go to my nieces and nephews. So they're all minor age kids. So I still also need a trust because I don't want that whole probate process for them. The other one is owning a home, owning any real estate. That's a good time to have a trust because real estate is the number one thing outside of kids that will place you inside the probate process. So you want to avoid that for your family, especially if that's your mainly asset. Because in probate, you're opening up yourself to creditors and a whole lot of other people to come claim to your estate. With a trust, you're able to avoid that. The other one is business. You hit on you're right on the head with the question there. If you have a business, especially a business with employees, you want to trust because the day you die, unless everything is set up correctly, no one is paying those individuals until they go through the probate process. I don't know about you, but I would like to pay my employees even though I'm gone. And so people don't realize those things will pull you in to the probate process. And so those are really your three kind of common ones when it comes to assets or just kind of family dynamic. And the fourth can be the needs of your kids. I've had clients where they have a drug addict child. Like a trust will allow for you to help manage and take care of that child even after you're gone, rather than them inheriting 100 and some odd thousand dollars and going and killing themselves because they drug overdose because suddenly they have a ton of cash on hand. I've seen what that looks like. So those are kind of the areas where I say, hey, you're really starting to blend into a trust. And then blended families. That fits right into it because if you have kids from separate marriages, even if they grew up together, the dynamic there can be necessary for a trust. And that helps make sure that your new spouse is taken care of, they have a place to live, or everyone, it's clearly defined who's getting what in terms of your assets. And a trust is much harder to fight and invalidate than a will is. And so you want to put those into place. So there is a multitude of areas that can mean a trust over a will. And typically it's just me sitting down with a client to find out and start understanding their family dynamic. It doesn't even mean that they have to have $100,000. It just mean that their family has a particular issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah,
So
what are some common maybe things that pitfalls, like things that people have an idea to do for their trust, but it's really not helping them? Or are there things like that when it comes to trust and putting all this together?
yeah, I have certain clients who want to be super restrictive as to when their kids can inherit things. Um, there are good plans. Like good plans can say, hey, I have young children. I want to make sure they're taken care of if I pass before they reach 18. And then I want to add in like they go to college and we'll pay for that. And then they inherit at age 25. But I have clients who come in and say, no, I don't want my kids to inherit until they're age 65. But the kid is 8 years old. Well, if they pass away tomorrow, we have 57 years of administering a trust. Well, administering a trust means we're filing tax returns and someone's being paid to make sure these funds are going places and being invested. That can draw down on a trust if you have very few assets, or it can just mean something is locked up unnecessarily because it was never adjusted. So, unlike like lengthy distribution plans, overly complex distribution plans, like requiring they do blanking on the guy's name, the budget guy, Dave Ramsey. I have people who require all these financial courses and all of these things, rather than being inducing to help someone to obtain assets. They restrict their child from obtaining something that's really beneficial to them. So that's
Mm,
the common pitfall.
yeah. How long does it take to put a trust together? If someone's like listening in, they're like, I want to do this, but like how long does this take?
On average, about 3 to 4 weeks from the time I meet with my clients. I walk through, we go through everything. I kind of have a standard questionnaire of certain things that say, hey, I need to know your name, your kid's name, what you're thinking, who you want to represent you, because we're talking about a trustee, so someone you trust to manage finances after you pass away. So you have to understand that you're not wanting someone that's like going to take care of your kids just to manage your finances when they're out blowing money on their own. You're just like, they're constantly in debt, constantly asking for money. That's probably the worst person to put in charge of your trust. So you got to figure out those things. But once we have that down, I normally am finishing out most of my clients within 3 to 4 weeks from meeting with them. And I've multiple meetings can work, but yeah, it's normally within a month, I would say.
So 3 to 4 weeks on average, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Um, the trust is set up, right? You're ready to go. Um, what then? Like, how often do we review this? Do we need to review it? If people pass away that you've made a trustee, like, so how does that work? I guess, is that just like called maintenance, like trust maintenance? Is that what that is?
Trust maintenance. So really after the trust is created, in order for the trust to be effective and to avoid probate, we want to make sure all of your assets get into the trust. So trust is formed. Now we can head it off and start moving like real estate in. So we prepare the things that need to get those things in, the businesses that they have into the trust. And then most people have bank accounts, 401ks, cars, just normal investments. Those things have work that need to be done that get them transferred into the trust. And so once all of that's completed, then it's maintenance. And I normally tell my clients every 5 years or major life events. And the reason why I say that is because if one of the spouses pass away, we may want to adjust the trust. There's also things that relate to tax planning, to ensuring that you are able to take advantage of as much capital gains things, even though your spouse has passed. So those things all come into play. Like I had a client, her husband died while golfing this year. Like he went out, was putting his golf clubs on the course, hopped back in to his car to move it to wherever it was supposed to be doing, and had a heart attack and died.
Mm,
Um, but he has $18 million to his name. Some people don't have that issue, but this guy did. And not everything was set up correctly. Not all of his assets were inside the trust. Um, and luckily enough, he at least put some interplay in there, but we want to make sure all of your assets get inside the trust and then going forward, adjusting. And so that client, his wife, she came in and I said, one of the first things we need to do is make sure the trust is updated for what she wishes and make sure that we know the value of the home. Because how they own it can also affect their taxes if they go sell the house later. Because there's a cool thing called a step up in basis. Like those things we want to make sure are taken care of going forward so it's clean and clear so clients can take care of tax issues and then maintaining their trust.
wow. Norman, this is amazing. Like, the amount of information we've gone over so far is overwhelming in a good way, right? If someone has a trust set up, they need to make sure that within 5 years they're doing that maintenance on it. If they come into more assets, they need to make sure those assets are getting in there. If something changes in their marriage, if they have another child, like, all of these things affect making sure that we're not just like, it's not a set it and forget it. We did it, we're done. We need to continue making sure that everything is taken care of and it's taken care of properly. Um, so much information. Like, my mind is spinning right now.
Oh yeah.
Um,
One of the most famous cases recently that involved not updating their trust was Kobe Bryant. Kobe
mm,
Bryant had his trust set up for his two daughters, and I think there was a third that was recently born that before he passed. So his trust had his two children listed, but it didn't have the new child. And so after he passed, we had to, they're not me, but his attorneys in LA had to go to court and get a court to add the third child. So that child wasn't disinherited. So it's simple things like that, that maintenance of the trust can unintentionally create negative estate plan issues and make an issue. Because being disinherited unintentionally is something that can happen if the trust wasn't designed the correct way in the first place.
yeah.
And
Wow.
then I think one of the other things is people forget normally when I'm doing trust, I'm doing powers of attorney too, because I'm focusing on a holistic approach. And around the 5 year mark is a good time to update all of your powers of attorney because institutions are less likely to accept them. the older the document is from the time you signed it, because they don't know if you've adjusted your plan. Um, Maybe you've gotten divorced and you no longer want your spouse on those documents. Maybe you had a falling out with whoever the backup was. And so now they're in charge of your finances while you're incapacitated. So those things also interplay with why the 5-year rule comes in, is because I want to holistically see what's happened in your life and we can make adjustments to make sure all that's correct.
Yeah. So you mentioned power of attorney. We mentioned trust, will. So is it like a is it a package deal? I mean, we're not going to Costco here, but like there's not just when you're setting up a trust in your mind, like is it also setting up so trust, will, and then powers of attorney?
Yeah.
Okay.
That, and the reason being is I would be doing you a disservice to only focus on what's happening after you pass away, because there's people every day who end up in a car accident in an ER room, incapacitated for weeks, or get sick randomly. And none of those things ever cause death, but that impacts their day to day life, the bills. People can get evicted. I was reading an article the other day. Mom randomly picked up, I think it was like pneumonia, ended up in the hospital for like 3 weeks. Now she's facing eviction because she couldn't work for 3 weeks. Those types of things, but no one was there to help ensure the finances were being taken care of, because none of that was put into place. So that's it. To me, I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't set that up also to make sure that your day-to-day life is taken care of if something happens.
So what are the different how many powers of attorney are there, or the most common ones, and what are they?
So you have your general durable power of attorney, which I pretty much call your financial power of attorney. And so that's going to focus on anything that isn't a medical decision. So that's dealing with bank accounts, that's dealing with the utility companies, that's dealing with your business. They're pretty broad scope documents. It can even making sure if later in life you're in a care facility, or your spouse is in a care facility, you need to make sure the spouse is takes care of pets, children, all of these different things. And then you have your general healthcare power of attorney. So that's like, I'm in the middle of a surgery. Who can make a decision for me if they find something unexpected?
Hmm.
Or if you're starting to suffer from dementia, Alzheimer's, those things, who can make those care decisions for you? And then in Arizona, we have a unique one called a mental health care power of attorney, and that's focusing on someone's psychiatric needs. Most people don't realize that you can get placed into a psychiatric facility at the discretion of a nurse, a police officer, a firefighter. Someone in a public safety role can make a determination you're a threat to yourself or someone else, and then detain you. So that mental health care allows for your family to interject into what that looks like. Otherwise, you're a ward of the state and you don't have a whole lot of authority in that. Um, then you have your living will. So during COVID, there's a lot of people who got COVID and then ended up on incubation, and then ended up having to be pulled off of the incubation because their lungs could no longer support themselves. And that happens quite often. I've been there for when a client's been pulled off of life support because they just couldn't function without the machines anymore. And no one wants to see their family sitting there, just laying there for months on end, um, in that situation. And then there's a HIPAA. So we want to make sure everyone who's on one of those other medical powers of attorney can know your medical information, but we may want to add someone like a brother or sister or parent who isn't making a direct decision, so we can at least be in the room when decisions are being made. So those are your kind of four standard, five standard actually, with your financial and then your four medical powers of attorney. So those,
Wow.
I recommend everyone gets them. As soon as you're 18, you have at least those 5 documents in place.
Yeah. I mean, the importance of this is there's no question that everyone should have a trust, and with all of that included. Um, because like you said, things can happen any day. And if you don't have things set up, it just makes it harder because there's like this life event that just happened. And then you need to just have the time to deal with that event.
Mhm.
But compounding these other things in addition to that event, because we didn't get things properly set up, it just makes everything harder.
Oh yeah, absolutely does. And it adds unnecessary stress to everyone involved. You
Yeah.
want to be recuperating. You don't want to be stressing of whether or not you're getting evicted from where you're living or your business is failing or because something went wrong. One of the common examples is APS, SRP. If only one spouse is listed on a utility account with them, they're not talking to the spouse that's not on there. But if you have the financial power of attorney, you can submit that in and now be able to deal with paying the bill or monitoring your power account. Imagine having your power turned off while this is all going on. Like that is that's rather frustrating. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I mean, I've seen a lot of different like names for trusts. Like you can, right? You could pick whatever you want it to be called,
Mhm.
right? Um, I think what's most common that I've seen is just like a last name, like last name family trust. Is
Yeah.
that right? Any like interesting or funny or out of the norm names that you've dealt with? Pun
I've
intended
had
there.
like the Star Family Trust. I've had the Treasure Trust or some variation of it being like a gold search hunt. Um, and then like I have a certain nickname that I will use. So mine is the Stormin Trust, Storm and Norman, right? So, but I even had one where the family was just like, hey, our name is pretty common. So let's do the Hammy Family Trust. So it's not even the word family, it's Fammy. So it's Hammy, and because their last name I think was like Hamilton or some variation to that. And so people can be rather inventive. As long as it's not offensive, you can name your trust a lot of things. But I do
Yeah.
recommend on the shorter end because it still has to go on legal documents. And the longer it is, the harder it can become. Get on there.
We've noticed that on real estate contracts for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. A lot of great information here. We got into like the personal side, right? Obviously, there's a big real estate component here. Like we talk about like leaving a legacy. A lot of people talk about that, and I guess has there anything that hasn't been mentioned yet in regards to like when a deal? I mean, we can go real estate specific if you want. On a trust when it comes to real estate and just leaving a legacy and a strategy or any um, I guess, tip that you want to make sure people are aware of?
Yeah. Um, if you have a rental, for sure you want to trust. If you have, because you don't even have to be living in the house yourself, you can be renting. But if you have a rental, you want to trust. If you have multiple rentals, you want to trust. And the reason being is there's a kind of a dual layer going on here. We want to make sure it's efficient to go through. We don't have to go through the probate process. We're not having to evict anyone in those rentals. Everything's seamlessly set up with your banks, or the individuals can manage the rent that's coming in. And if someone needs to sell these things off, they're also already set to do so. But there's another layer to all of this, and that's setting up an LLC. A lot of these, like, I wouldn't be doing a good job if I didn't tell my clients, hey, you have a rental. You need an LLC for that rental. Part of it comes down to, A, I want to limit liability because most people don't realize someone breaks their ankle on your rental property. They can sue your insurance company and sue you for whatever damages, and you may be liable for that. So if you limit it to the limited liability company, they can only go after the insurance company and the property, not the rest of your assets. And so if you start having multiple rentals, you want essentially an LLC structure that helps benefit that. But there are also other tax benefits that have to come into play. If you have a rental solely in your name, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the step up in basis. The step up in basis for all your property when you pass that is anything that I own that's being inherited will get adjusted to the current fair market value at the time. So hypothetically, if you bought a house in the early 90s, like my parents did for like $70,000, their house now is somewhere in the range of 800 to $1 million. So when they pass away, it will get adjusted to what the current fair market value is. But your rental properties, not necessarily. If they're not set up correctly, they could get that adjustment. But if they're inside an LLC, you have a dual function. You can get a step up in basis on the LLC, and you can get a step up in basis on the actual rental property. So there are functions that you want to make sure rental properties are set up with good liability protection and will be designed so that when your kids inherit it, it's simple and clean. And then with a trust, you can say a specific house or a group of houses go to a certain kid. So you can essentially divide up how your business is going to function, your wealth, in an easy fashion rather than having to go through what a court would deem is the best for your kids. And so I think
Mm.
that's the key thing is with trust is there's flexibility to plan for what you really want and to adjust to the needs of your kids, um, and or any of your beneficiaries.
So you mentioned a different LLC for every rental property. That's a big one, right? And we tell a lot of our clients that as well. Um, when someone sells a piece of property that's in their trust, they need to have a bank account tied to that trust name. The trust needs a bank account,
Yes,
correct? Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it can be a property tax refund or it could be the sale of the home. But if you get any funds that are directed towards that trust, you need to be able to cash it. So all trusts need a trust bank account. And so during that process, after the trust is created, I walk through like this is the accounts you have. You can either convert one of these into a trust account or you change this structure around for beneficiary purposes, and then we go create a trust account just to ensure that if any hiccups come along the way, everything's already set up. And the benefit to doing that is when you pass, your trustee gets your death certificate, they can walk right into the bank. And that's typically a couple weeks after you pass and start managing everything involving the trust accounts and your personal accounts
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
having to take extra steps.
Yeah. I mean, quick story, we knew someone that was selling their property. The agent on our team helped them sell the property. Great transaction, and they had a need for the money right away. So sale occurred. Title company is ready to wire those funds over, and the seller did not have an account for the trust. So they did, they thought like, hey, we did everything right. We got a trust, we had the property in the trust, ready to go. They needed those monies quick. Title company says, we were ready to send it to you, but it can't just be to you. It has to be like, what is the account number for the trust? And the person said, no, 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 like I own the trust. It's my name. It's my trust. You just send it to me. We're all good. And the title company said, no, no, that's not how it works. So that person had to open up an account, and it took a few days to get that all taken care of.
Yep.
And they were, close on losing out on whatever they needed those funds for. So again, just make sure that bank account is set up. I'll never forget that moment. And they thought it was a title company thing, and it's really just it was on them. And their trust attorney did not coach them accordingly, and they didn't have that set up.
Yeah. I was visiting with a client last week. They're redoing their trust, and I didn't do their trust in the first place. So they're now coming and finding me, and they wanted to understand what's uniquely different about me. And part of the reason why I got into this is, like I talked about, is my grandmother. No one followed up. It was, hey, I made a transaction. I got you to sign this trust, and I made my money, and I'm walking out the door. There's a lot of individuals like that. I'm not. My goal is to make sure that you have set this up correctly. So I have clients email me all the time saying, hey, Norman, I'm heading to the bank. Exactly what am I talking to them about? I prefer that 5 minutes on an email or a phone call to make sure all of these things are set up. I want my clients to follow up and say, hey, I'm not sure what this is going on. I will tell them exactly what they can do. The issue is I can't be Lauren Smith. So your bank isn't going to listen to Norman over here because I'm just not that person. But I can tell my clients exactly what they should be doing And I want it to be as simple as possible throughout your life and once you have passed for your family to administer the trust. I don't want any, oh, this thing was a terrible experience. I don't know why my parents did this, because someone just decided to cash in and not actually make sure their clients were taken care of.
So you mentioned something really important. You said that someone else did their trust and they came to you with their trust and is moving forward with you on revising it and making sure it's buttoned up for their needs in today's world versus when they had it set up originally. So that's interesting. I don't know if everyone knows that. So you're saying that if someone has a trust, maybe their trust attorney passed away, maybe they moved away, maybe they retired, maybe whatever happened, they have this trust. They are not needing to reinvent or create a new trust necessarily. They might need to, depending on after you look at it, but really they can bring that to you and you can review all of that with them. And it could be good. Like there's nothing to do just to update right every 5 years, but um but you're able to do that and help people in that way as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, I go through
Okay.
trust all the time and say, hey, this is what's going on. Do you still want this? Here's a pitfall from how this is structured. But for most people, they're getting what's called a revocable trust or a living trust or a family trust. And those typically allow for you to adjust the trust. There are some mechanisms in there that have some issues, though. So if you originally created a trust with your spouse and your spouse has since passed, you probably want someone to review your trust to make sure it is functioning the way that it was designed when you both originally signed it. But I'm actually meeting with one of your clients next week because in this particular situation, she wants to add her daughters as co-trustees um, to help manage everything going on with their assets now. Just because she's at an age it's a little more advantageous to have her adult children helping out. And
Mm.
so I can do that because I look through their trust and that is perfectly allowable. But those things, your trust is meant to be an aid to you through your life. And if it's designed correctly and maintained correctly, you shouldn't have a ton of issues. Um, and it should be a peaceful thing. To me, your trust should really just bring peace. It's like I got peace of mind. Everything is going to operate the way I wanted it to. And that's my goal.
That's it. That's really interesting. And yeah, it's that peace, it's that clarity, it's that knowing that, you're doing everything possible again to not make it harder for your loved ones to take things on because it might be hard enough already.
Oh yeah.
And and yeah, yeah. What are some other topics that you'd like to cover? I think we knocked on so many things that I think there's so many gold nuggets here for people to realize. I think the main reason that you're on the real deal is, I mean, everyone can already sense it if you've watched this far. I mean, it's you definitely know what you're talking about. You enjoy helping people and setting them up for success and leaving that legacy, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be the $18 million thing. It could be $18, a car, and a house, but the process for the loved ones dealing with that it's just so much more at peace. It's easier, that whole thing. When someone is working through putting their trust together, and they're having those maintenance meetings with you, who are some other professionals that they should have like on their team with those meetings, or is it just really you and them? What are you seeing as a common practice?
So for confidentiality purposes, it's typically the client and I. But
Okay.
if they allow for me to talk outside the scope, I often talk to their financial advisor, their whoever's doing investments for them. I can be talking to their banker. I can even be talking with you as involved with real estate and how they manage those things, even a property management company. So it really comes down to what assets they have. But I have talked to anyone from financial advisors, bankers, real estate agents to medical care professionals. It's quite the gamut. But I normally recommend at least your financial advisor, your CPA, even. CPAs play a huge role in making sure everything's aligned each year. Um, and then anyone that's helping manage any of your businesses or real estate, if you have those things. And then also guardians. If you have minor age kids, you want them, the guardians and the backup trustees, to understand what that functions like, what the trust looks like. So I've even done pre-meeting, even though you're not passing away. Like, do I expect, I'm 38 years old. Do I think I'm going to pass away tomorrow? No. But I would much rather have the team of individuals that I trust knowing what's going on. So I've had clients come in and say, hey, can you walk through my trust with everyone here so we understand what it looks like? And then if you do have multiple rental properties, I will be working with your CPA because there are functions within that on how your LLC works and how the trust works. And those things all can interplay. But yeah, financial advisors, CPA, real estate, medical professionals, bankers. Right?
Yeah, just getting everyone on the same page. I mean, it's important that we all have this team around us that specialize in what they do. And sometimes the CPA will mention something and the real estate advisor might mention something with you. And then there might be a light bulb moment that goes off where there's maybe a tax savings. There could be just making sure everyone's on the same page with what this person's goals are, the whole thing. Maybe they buy a lot of real estate, they forgot to put one in the trust,
Yeah.
right? And I would mention something, and you're like, hold on, they bought which one? Like, I don't think we have that one in, and just to update and get things going. That's
Yeah.
great.
I
Yeah.
had a meeting this week with the, not this week, it was last week, with a client who had bought a property. Their CPA had put it inside an LLC, but the LLC was still in their name. So even though they own a trust, the CPA hadn't set up that property correctly. So that property is now going to be a probatable asset until we get it fixed. So it's making sure all of us are on the same page on making sure that that is all correlated. It's really helpful because you also have, like, life insurance can play a huge role. If you have a ton of real estate, right now it's a $14 million exemption per person. So unless you have $14 million, there isn't going to be a ton of estate tax planning. But if you have appreciative assets, like 4 or 5 rental properties, that number could be a lot closer to be reached than you would expect. But that $14 million is supposed to go as low as 7 million by the end of 2025, unless
Hmm.
Congress and the new president do something about that. But if you go back to the 90s, that number was as low as $600,000. Think about what that looks like. And anything above that estate tax exemption is normally taxed about 40 to 50%. So it's like you want to make sure all of these things are set up correctly so we can plan. I can even use a life insurance to help plan, like a life insurance policy to help pay any potentially due taxes or make sure your minor age kids are taken care of. There's all of these things, but making sure your team of individuals and I talk is one of the things I like to do. So,
Yeah. You mentioned that the LLC, the owner of the LLC has to be the trust, not the individual.
mhm. Yeah.
How many people listening right now knew that? I don't know. That's new. That's new for me.
And you right now have that CTA thing, and there's some injunction, there's interplay there, whether or not you have to file by the end of the year. That's a whole other matter.
Right?
I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah.
But the CTA, there's certain reporting requirements there. So I had a client just actually adjust their estate plan, but that's affecting their LLC. So they now have to report for the CTA purposes who the trust beneficiaries are and the trust managers. So there's a lot of different things that can interplay involving just the LLC. But the core is you want your LLC to be owned by your trust. Otherwise, we have a probatable asset.
Yeah. That could be an action item for most people listening in right now. So that's another gold nugget. Another takeaway that I have today, Norm, is just trusts are not just for the wealthy. And I think people think that. Do you kind of feel that way too when you're speaking to people about, hey, do you have your trust, set up, and is there pushback like, oh, well, I don't really have millions of dollars and tons of real estate. I don't That's for the wealthy.
I actually met with a client last week who came in and said, I only need a will, and walked through and told me exactly why they needed a will. And I was like, okay. And in this instance, they didn't have any kids. So they're married, no kids. They have a house. Like, I walked them through and had to explain this is where the trust would be advantageous versus where a will fits in. The goal is, what do you ultimately want? Do you mind if your family has to go through a probate court and have a judge involved? Or do you want this to be streamlined? But I've had clients with less than $100,000 to their name put everything in a trust because they have that drug addict child. And I've had
Mm.
the one client with $10 million in investments only set up a will because everything is going to one kid. Like, there, every plan I do is designed to fit the needs of that client. But to me, trusts are the best, most beneficial thing because they are flexible. As long as you're willing to adjust them and everything, they will be doing the thing that you want them to do and not have to have a third party weigh in. Um, and I think that's really what my goal is, to make sure it fits their needs and will accomplish what they want. Uh, but yeah, trusts are not wealthy tactics. They are for everyone. And I also had a longtime friend in a grocery store come up to me. I was telling her what I do, and she's a wife of the CPA, and she was like, "Everyone gets a trust, and they don't need it. And I don't know why they do it." And I was sitting there going, for my client that had the son with the drug overdose, the child with autism who's probably going to be on special needs, Medicaid, state government programs for the remainder of their life, that trust was beneficial. And those are the things, like, most people don't realize trust fits a lot of different things, and a will doesn't. And I still remember that conversation happened probably 4 or 5 years ago in the Safeway vegetable section, and I was surprised. I was like, "You are in an industry. Your husband's in the industry at least, and you help out there to know better that there is more than one function to a trust." And I had to explain to that grocery store that day. But
Yeah.
everyone avoids eating vegetables, so everyone tries to avoid planning for their estate and planning for their death too. So, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mentioned earlier. It took a few years for Danielle and I to sit down and put our trust together because of just that conversation. We're talking about when we are gone. And you start that kind of opens up like this, like, hole of, like, you're kind of going down this morbid hole of, like, when we're gone, and how are the kids going to be, how are our friends, like, just all of the things, right? And eventually we just said, this is not about our feelings right now, it's about what is important, and setting it up properly is what we want to do, and we just got it, we had to get done. But it was just one of those conversations where, you don't want to have it, but if someone is listening in, and you need to do it, and you just don't want to have that conversation, um try having the conversation of, like, why you didn't do it, and now your family is dealing with more problems that they need to, paying more money that they need to, and it's just taking so much more time that it has to linger. It's like that, why didn't mom and dad do this uh when they had the ability to do it?
Yeah, that's what it really comes down to, is the trust itself is an act of love. I've joked with my clients that are signing with their estate plans this week, put this underneath your Christmas tree. Just because this is probably the best gift you could give your 2-year-old child or your 50-year-old child, because it's going to make their lives so much easier so they can grieve your loss rather than being focused on where food's coming from, where they're being taken care of, or, hey, how do we deal with this mess of mom or dad didn't fix this and now we have to go deal with oil rights in Texas. And it's just like, it's just, those things can be overwhelming. And if you already have a kid that can't function in those regards, that struggles when things get tough, putting them in a position where they have to be dealing with your creditors, a judge, siblings that they don't get along with, like, that is the worst thing you could do to a family. And I think by pre-planning everything else, that is actually your better gift. And it is hard. And that's why I'm here. And most of my clients will tell you I make it fun. I do my best to make sure it is an appropriate conversation, still lighthearted, but we can get through and accomplish everything and make it as seamless and easy as possible. So you just go, oh, wow, like, I didn't have to delve into what my death looks like and thinking about that. And instead, let's focus on the practicalities of what this really will look like. And then I will help your kids walk through your death, not you right now.
Yeah. Norman, thank you very much for being on. Is there anything else that we want to touch on?
Um, I think just during the holiday season, that's really what you want to focus on is what is the gift that you really want to leave your family. And I don't mind just sitting down and talking with anyone about what it looks like. So I'm always here to help. That is my goal. Like I said, I prefer my clients send me that 5 minute email that I can quickly respond and make sure everything goes forward with. But if you do nothing else, at least get powers of attorney in place and a will. Um, I'm here to help.
Awesome. Norman, thank you very much. We really appreciate it and have a great day.
You too.